What could possibly go wrong as Donald Trump repeats threats of a Venezuela-style seizing of Tehran's oil exports as U.S. assault troops get in position? The price of a barrel blowing past $110 a barrel as markets take it at face value that the Pentagon is planning to make a grab for Kharg Island, the hub for nearly 90% of Iranian crude exports. We'll ask about the pitfalls of sailing warships past the Strait of Hormuz for an invasion, the Islamic Republic's response, and how Gulf neighbors would view it all. Since 1945, the United States has positioned itself as the Arabian Peninsula's main security guarantor. Will it still be the same when the dust settles? Today in the France 24 debate, we're asking, will there be U.S. boots on the ground? With us from Istanbul, journalist Borzudar Gahi, who covers the war on his Badlands Substack page. Good to see you.
It's a pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
From Washington, Zineb Ribua, research fellow at the Hudson Institute think tank. Welcome back to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Military historian Guillaume Lesconjayas is associate professor at the Sorbonne University. How are you?
Good. Thank you.
And we're also joined by energy policy researcher Anne-Sophie Corbeau of Columbia University's School of International and Public Affairs. Welcome.
Thank you for having me.
You can always listen, that's right, listen to the show wherever podcasts are streamed. Yeah, Donald Trump set April 6th as the deadline for Iran to sign, or else. Trump positioning the 2,200 troops aboard the USS Tripoli as he threatens to hit critical infrastructure, including Iranian desalination plants. Beyond the bluster, Peter O'Brien examines the options and the pitfalls that lie before him.
When assessing Donald Trump's options for the war he started, it's best to begin with the options he doesn't have. As it stands, he can't claim to have stopped Iran's nuclear program, he can't convince the Iranian people to topple their government, and he doesn't appear able to reopen the Strait of Hormuz without the help of European allies. But the American president is still insisting the war will be over soon. So what options does he have? In his own words,
if for any reason a deal is not shortly reached, which it probably will be, and if the Hormuz Strait is not immediately open for business, we will conclude our lovely stay in Iran by blowing up and completely obliterating all of their electric generating plants, oil wells and Kharg Island, and possibly all desalination plants.
This plan to attack civilian infrastructure adds to Trump's earlier comments threatening to send US troops to capture Kharg Island, Iran's oil lifeline, and reporting that he's thinking about a mission to put troops inside the country for days or longer in order to extract a critical stockpile of more than 450 kilograms of uranium.
We want the nuclear dust. We're going to want that, and I think we're going to get that.
These boots-on-the-ground missions would carry significant risks to personnel in a war that's already deeply unpopular with American people. While a final major air assault before walking away would only be a Pyrrhic victory with the Gulf massively destabilized. Whatever course of action the commander-in-chief chooses, he's already selling it as a major victory, claiming, for instance, to have already brought about regime change by killing top Iranian officials, while all signs point to Iran's commitment to continue the fight.
Borzudar Gahi, what are the chances of boots on the ground?
I mean, it looks pretty good. Ever since the Ukraine war and the Russian invasion of Ukraine, we've learned really to stop listening to what these politicians and leaders say and to just examine the movement of troops and personnel and equipment. And it does appear very much that the U.S. is gathering enough forces and equipment for some kind of amphibious assault, or possibly, and that would be really wild, some kind of parachuting into central Iran to take out these the enriched uranium, which is who knows how many hundreds of feet underneath a collapsed mountain, and what that would entail to bring that stuff out and get it aboard a plane and take it out. I think that is much more far-fetched, but it does appear that the U.S. is preparing for that.
Preparing for that, and I'm sure the Iranians are preparing for a response.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the Iranians, they view this as the war that they've been waiting for 30 or so years. And the idea of a ground invasion gives them a kind of home advantage. It gives them the possibility of attacking the Americans in a number of ways. They want to, they feel the regime feels very wronged. They feel that it was a kind of Game of Thrones red wedding kind of event where their supreme leader was knocked out during the middle of negotiations, and a school full of children was killed. And there's this sense of righteous rage, and they want to inflict a lot of pain on the Americans, and they can't do that with their missiles, and they have no air force. But what they can do is, if there is a ground invasion, to try to use whatever resources they have to pummel the American soldiers. They want to create body bags and send them back home. They fantasize about that in their propaganda videos that they're putting out on the internet in Lego form. So they're basically looking, I think that they look forward to a ground invasion. That is something that they can handle, whereas airstrikes and Tomahawk missiles is something they can't.
So, Zineb Ribou, it doesn't sound, listening to Borzu, like it's a great idea to seize Kharg Island. You agree with him?
Well, I think that there is definitely a deterrence dimension. As you mentioned earlier, Kharg Island possesses roughly 90% of Iranian crude exports. But what I would say actually is that it's impossible, and it's very important to not dissociate what is happening in the Strait of Hormuz from what makes actually Kharg even more consequential for Trump. Because Iran developed the threat to close the strait as basically this ultimate deterrent instrument. 20% of global oil supplies, nearly a third of all liquefied natural gas transit, that choke point. And I think that what Trump is looking at is that Kharg is a way to remove the financial foundation that makes Hormuz weaponization sustainable for the Iranians. And Iran that cannot export oil actually loses a war that is required to maintain the naval and missile infrastructure the Hormuz Strait demands. And I think it's important to not dissociate these things. I totally agree. We see a move of assets and troops, and I don't think that Trump bluffs and does not. I think he's very serious about this. I think that this is not the first time that he mentions Kharg Island. He mentioned Kharg Island in, I think, 1988 during an interview. So he's been looking at it for a very long time.
Of course, he mentions it in two forms. One is an occupation, and the other, as we saw in that Truth Social post, is just basically blowing it up. What are the pitfalls?
Well, I think it definitely depends. Blowing it up, it means basically taking out IRGC, Oil Depot, or what would have contributed to their revenue. But I think that for this specific, operation, there will be a lot of discussions with Gulf countries, with Saudi Arabia, with the UAE, with Bahrain. And I think that this will tell us more about what type of military maneuvers he will do. But however, I will not dismiss the fact that they already did that inside Iran, but they might do it on Kharg Island as well to just take out what makes IRGC funding possible.
Will he listen to those Gulf neighbors?
I mean, the Gulf neighbors are pressuring the United States right now to actually finish the job. In fact, Saudi Arabia has been a victim and absolutely under Houthi pressure for a very long time. There was the Houthi have struck Saudi Aramco infrastructure in 2019. So I think that there is an alignment here to absolutely take into consideration.
All right, that is one way of looking at it. Of course, we've also seen how there's been this surprise meeting this Monday taking place of Gulf monarchs. We had the King of Saudi Arabia welcoming to Jeddah the Emir of Qatar and the King of Jordan. To talk. This, as we've seen the Egyptian president following up on Saturday's slapping of a 1-month 9 p.m. curfew on shops, restaurants, shopping malls, and cafes to save energy. Egypt's president following up with a direct appeal to Donald Trump.
You, Mr. President, are someone who loves peace, and I'm directing this message to you personally, on my behalf, on behalf of the entire region, and on behalf of the whole world. Given the serious consequences of the war continuing any longer, please, Mr. President, please help us stop the war. You are capable of doing so.
Now, of course, Guillaume Nasconjaïas, that's not a call to finish the job. That's a call to stop the fighting.
Well, actually, that also says two things. First, that the Gulf countries, as well also as Egypt, have been quite surprised about how it did unfold. And basically, especially for the petromonarchies, they have built their stability on security and peace. They have lost both. And they have lost both for a very long time. So if they are not stepping in now, Iran will basically remain a threat for a long period of time. And if the US would leave without finishing the job, to quote, everybody here, then it feels like the threat will still be there. And even Iran that would be changed or turned into a black hole is not very reassuring. It's only creating a source of massive threat that would just only keep ramping for all the region without ensuring any kind of reassurance, nor the end of the nuclear threat, the ability to use proxies here and there. So, in a nutshell, if the US leave now, they will leave a massive job undone that will make Iraq post-2003 look like probably a paradise. And it's, in a way, something that was the total dismissal of security and stability will be the reality of the Middle East for the probably next 20 to 30 years.
And the Saudis in all of this, because we heard over the weekend some jokingly disparaging remarks by Donald Trump regarding the Saudi crown prince, and then he said in the next breath how he thinks he's great. So those remarks perhaps just him a bit freestyling. But he do you see, because I've seen both written, that the Saudis are calling for restraint publicly but privately cheering him on. Which is it?
The thing is, most of these monarchies have to change even their defense model. For a very long period of time, they have just bought the American security guarantee, as mainly European countries always did. So the thing is, you have now to shift towards not being a security benefiter, but to be a responsibility security actor. It means for these countries, and Saudi Arabia especially, that you have to change from being a market for very high expensive silver bullet military equipment to be able to literally use it. The Saudi and also the UAE partially did it in Yemen with little success. If they want to step in and be able to act, they have to change the strategic culture. And again, that will take time.
So on that point, the three countries that are having that huddle in Jeddah, Jordan, Qatar, and Saudi Arabia, are the three countries that were visited by Volodymyr Zelensky over the weekend selling his drone technology.
Also, it means also that now they're willing and able. If they can deter the drone threat coming from Iran, they will have also some kind of upper hand, because they will re-establish some kind of deterrence with regards to this very particular kind of threat. However, there is a long road to walk from being able to limit the drone threat to being able to definitely and decisively act against Iran. So it's literally something that will only, for a quick moment, re-establish this kind of deterrence, but it will not be enough.
And Sophie Corbeau, let's get back to that initial threat that began our work week by Donald Trump to destroy Kharg Island. Do you believe that? What would destroying Kharg Island mean, not just for Iran, but for the planet?
Well, given that we have already lost the Strait of Hormuz transit, in particular, I mean, there is still a little bit of Iranian oil which is transiting through that would just add another pressure to the oil market. So if on top of that, the problem of the Strait of Hormuz is not solved, that would definitely increase global oil prices. What I'm also concerned about is a remake of what we have seen with Ras Laffan, so the LNG facilities which are in Qatar, and two of them were destroyed in retaliation to an attack on South Pars. So if there is an attack on Kharg Island, my concern is that there is going to be retaliation from Iran on the Gulf oil infrastructure. So again, we could see a remake of what happened in 2019, which has already been mentioned, an attack on Al-Qaeda, but that could be also an attack on over energy infrastructure in the Gulf. And that is really concerning, because if we have damaged infrastructure, that is going to remain for a long time. So even if the Iranian regime problem is solved, and this is a big if, you will still have a long-term problem with the oil infrastructure.
A long-term problem with the oil infrastructure. And again, we're wondering what Donald Trump's rationale is. We've seen among OECD countries, the U.S. is where inflation has risen the most in the past 1 month and 1 day since February the 28th. What will be the impact on for consumers if again there's this destruction of Kharg Island?
I mean, again, I mean, it really depends on whether this is just Kharg Island and everything resumes, in which case I think if the flows through the Strait of Hormuz are going back to where they were before, and that may take actually a little bit of time, because, I mean, some of the production has been shut in, but eventually oil prices will indeed come down. However, if we have the combination of there is no Strait of Hormuz passage, Kharg Island is destroyed, then the oil prices are going to increase even further, because I would like to remind everybody that there is still some Iranian oil which is going through the Strait of Hormuz right now, and that the US Navy is actually letting through.
All right, among the reactions, that of Iran's first vice president, who says, yes, the regime has changed, because Donald Trump's been claiming the regime change. Of course, it's changed the Strait of Hormuz regime. I guess it's how it's a loose translation. My Farsi is a bit rusty, Borzu Dargai. Mohammad Reza Aref, who posted this to X, formerly Twitter, and who wants preconditions for direct talks to include a pledge by Washington: we will no longer attack Iran, and we recognize all of Iran's international rights. Now, that's kind of the, like you were mentioning Lego earlier, Borzu. There's bluster on both sides in this phase. But again, the destruction of Kharg Island, what does it mean?
I mean, it will impact Iran, definitely. It won't only weaken the Revolutionary Guard, as Zainab said, it will weaken the nation of Iran. These are national assets that were built decades ago, even under the pro-US Shah. And what impact that will have is really counter to US war aims. It will mobilize people. You know, it will mobilize people who were part of the protests. They will come to the defense of what they see as their dear country. This is an intensely nationalistic nation. So you hit that oil infrastructure, it'll make regime change even more difficult. Look, I was just talking to an official, an international official in Tehran the other day, and what they were saying is that Iran has been preparing for this since June, and they have strategic reserves of food and fuel and other provisions. They've mobilized. You see how effectively they mobilize their search and rescue teams. They've been preparing for this since the June war last year. And what this person was saying to me is that Iran is prepared for a 6-month conflict. And that means they have the food, they have the oil, they have the fuel, they have all the reserves in place to fight for 6 months at this point. And so I don't think that it will end the war. I don't think destroying Kharg will end the war. It will just play into somewhat Iran's hands because it will give them an excuse to hit Saudi Aramco. It will give the Houthis an excuse to hit that pipeline that is taking oil from the Persian Gulf ports into the Red Sea. It will give the Houthis an excuse to close the Bab el-Mandeb, which will drive oil prices to even higher and will shut down essentially the Suez Canal. So I don't think that escalation is going to accomplish any of the U.S. goals in this conflict, if they even have any stated goals at this point, except to find some kind of graceful exit, which is basically what I suspect the Trump administration wants.
And on Saturday, an Iranian strike on Prince Sultan Air Base in central Saudi Arabia, blowing the tail off of a U.S. Air Force E-3 Sentry aircraft, as well as its rotating radar dome. There you see it. Originally said it was damaged. That's more than just damage. You can see in that image. Of course, they have 16 more of those, but. Again, Borzo Daragahi, this relates back to what was said earlier by Guillaume Lesconjayas. Are the U.S. and its Gulf allies bringing the wrong weaponry to this fight?
I don't think that the Gulf allies are culpable in that they're not really bringing weaponry to the fight yet. I think it's really more about the U.S. and Israel, and the Gulf states are just caught in between. I also think that the Gulf states and the Arab states are not completely unified. I think, for example, Qatar and Oman and Kuwait have very different positions on this conflict compared to Saudi Arabia and the UAE, and Jordan is a very different position as well. Pakistan, which is also impacted, is in a different situation and also involved. And Egypt, also very worried about that Suez Canal issue and the Houthis, is also a very different position. So I don't think that there's a unified position on this. And I think that really the question, the X factor, is not really so much the Gulf states, it's Israel and what it will do and how it will determine facts on the ground and lead the U.S. in whichever direction in the absence of any clear direction from the White House.
Israel's running the show, you're saying?
I don't think it's running the show, but I think it's running its own shop. It has specific goals that it wants. It wants Iran to be weakened, Iran as a state, not just the Islamic Republic. That is why it is, for example, one of the pictures you showed earlier in the newscast showed destruction, and it said Danish Cadet. It means college. They're hitting universities. They hit a dairy factory this morning, and so they have their goals, which is to diminish Iran as a state. The U.S. doesn't want that. The U.S. doesn't want the scenario that my colleague in the studio was describing of this black hole in the middle of the Middle East. But to Israel, I think that's fine. They're not running the show, but they actually have a clear agenda as opposed to the Trump administration.
So Zineb Riboua, you agree it's Israel because of the fact that it has a more, how should we say, disciplined policy on this that is really in the driver's seat?
Look, the United States is in the driver's seat. It's at the end of the day, it's really Trump who called the shot, and he's the one who has been tweeting for a very long time that he wants to make Iran great again. Iran has been an obstacle for the India-Middle East corridor, for the expansion of the Abraham Accords. It has weaponized Hamas, Houthis, Hezbollah in the region for a very long time. There is no possibility for the United States to exit the region unless there is a total containment of the Iran threat. And in fact, I would go even further. Every single target is discussed by Israel and the United States, but also with coordination with Gulf countries that are coordinating with CENTCOM. I think that there is a reality and there's an interpretation of it. It's true, Israel has always been very vocal about the Iran threat, about the nuclear program, about the missiles and so on. But there's also the bigger picture, the fact that Iran has been building missiles with petrochemicals and other with chemicals, but also with other components coming from China. The fact that the Chinese have been also helping the Houthis with targeting data. So there is a big problem here. And I think that the Trump administration just made the call to address it so that they can proceed on other foreign policy issues and make sure that the United States is in a better position to contain the upcoming challenges of the century.
Yes, but Israel is about regime change. Donald Trump doesn't state it as clearly.
I think he completely tweeted very clearly that that regime change does not have to be bad. And I think I don't remember exactly the tweet, but it exists and it's out there. The other thing is that Trump himself, during his press conference, he said that he wants the Iranians to go out and that once this whole military operation finishes. But I think that this is, a big problem in understanding the multiple dimensions of this operation. That is not just about Israel, and it's not just about Gulf countries, but it's also about understanding U.S. foreign policy and also about Trump's foreign policy in particular.
Guillaume Lesconjayas?
Actually, if strategy is, the combination of ends, ways, and means, we have not that clear idea about the ends, yet we have somehow the means and the ways. In my opinion, there are, I would say that regime change is not the end that is followed by the US, and probably it's the one that Israel has chosen. So we have a diverting, if not strategy, at least the ends might diverge between Israel and the US. However, there is one commonality that both pursue, that's the end of the nuclear program. In my opinion, that's how you can read also the situation and also the risk also of strategic dissension between the US and Israel is what happens if, for instance, the 440 kilos enriched Iranian is taken over. In that, that could sign the end of the war, at least for the US, because they would proclaim they have won by definitely forbidding Iran to become a nuclear country. Good. However, for Israel, that might not be enough. So, in my opinion, you can see that this is probably where the Israel and the US have in common, forbidding Iran to become a nuclear country.
And doing it by military means.
Yeah, well, actually, when you are a hammer, every problem looks like a nail, and that's exactly what happens. It's a narrow aeroballistic war so far, and the seizure of Kharg Island or anybody other part of the Iranian territory or soil, boots on the ground, as you asked, is a way to make this pressure on Iran more and more important.
With, as Borzou Dargahi said at the outset, the body bags that might ensue.
Probably that's the high risk, and that's probably also, as it was said, that that's the war that the Iranians are looking for. They've been wargaming it, they've been able to deploy and to resist, and so far as we can look, the IRGC has been highly targeted. What about the Artesh? So the regular conventional military. We know that the Iranian Navy is gone, the Iranian Air Force, that was easy. They had no air force at all, or almost none. So it remains the highly, not efficient at least, but very numerous Artesh conventional military. And those maybe are also the ability to tip the current Pasdaran regime down. If they shift or if they change side and join, for instance, with the regular people, that could be the major change.
All right, 1 month and 1 day, we've seen plenty of escalation, but it would be a whole new level if there were boots on the ground. And we saw a level of that escalation over the weekend. One single missile salvo on Israel broke a precedent. First time in a month of war that Yemen's Houthis were involved, and that's stoking concern over a second maritime front to watch, the Bab el-Mandeb Strait, entrance to the Red Sea, opposite Djibouti. And Sophie Corbeau, you heard Borzo Dargahi earlier in the conversation mention that the Houthis have not even hit the oil pipelines that go to the Red Sea so far. That would be a whole new level.
Yes, absolutely, because I mean, what Saudi Arabia has been doing is, given that they can't ship their oil through the Strait of Hormuz, they have been diverting the oil through an oil pipeline which is actually crossing the whole country. It's arriving into the Red Sea to Yanbu, where actually the oil can be, or the products can be charged into cargoes, and they can go to Asia because Asia is the main destination of the Gulf oil and products. So they can actually go through the Bab el-Mandeb Strait and then on to Asia. If that avenue is closed, then this is exactly, I mean, increasing the problem, and for sure, oil prices will increase even higher to even higher levels. And just also to rebound on what Guillaume was saying before, I mean, on this regime change, I mean, let's imagine, for example, that there is no regime change and that the current regime remains in place. What we have seen over the past few weeks is that some oil cargoes can actually go through the Strait of Hormuz, but then they have to pay a fee, which is about $2 million. What about that actually becomes a key feature of the Strait of Hormuz going forward? Of course, I mean, all the Gulf countries will absolutely hate that, but you need to think about if you are not actually going up to the regime change, then you are basically leaving these people in place. And maybe, you know, the tweet that you were showing a little bit earlier actually means that, exactly that. Iran has a greater control of the flows through the Strait of Hormuz, which would be a totally different ballgame for all the countries in the Gulf which are exporting oil, products, fertilizer, LNG, etc.
Yeah, and markets certainly don't believe it. We're near the end. Brent crude opening the week on a rise, went above $116 a barrel in early trading on Monday. Enough to prompt, there you see the graph of what it's been like over the past year and how it's shot up since February the 28th. It was enough to prompt a video call between G7 finance ministers. You mentioned that added cost of trying to insure tankers going through the Strait of Hormuz and Sophie Corbeau. Again, this for now doesn't seem to be stopping the war. We're talking about escalation, not de-escalation.
We are more talking about escalation because we don't know exactly how this is going to end, and we keep getting a lot of different tweets from Mr. Trump, President Trump, about, okay, we are progressing in terms of peace talks, but at the end of the day, maybe in a few days, I am going to completely bomb the whole country, destroy the energy infrastructure, and then I'm going to take over Iranian oil, or maybe I am going to actually bomb and destroy Kharg Island. It's very difficult to actually know exactly how this is ending, which is probably why we are seeing this even higher increase of the oil price, and maybe also because maybe the oil market doesn't really believe President Trump anymore, because, you know, we keep having these different messages which are varying from one day to another between we are moving forward towards a peace agreement and no, actually we are going towards a full war. And as was said at the very beginning of this interview, actually we are starting to see that there is a preparation for boots on the ground, which is of course not reassuring the market because they are anticipating potential further energy infrastructure destruction in the Gulf countries.
You look at that map, Guillaume Lasconjayas, the Bab el-Mandeb Strait, it's across from Djibouti, where there are bases not just of the United States, but also the likes of France and China.
And Japan and Italy. So it's interesting because in Djibouti, you have exactly, well, around 2,000 French troops, but it's the only place in the world where you have, as you mentioned, US, EU bases that literally wants to collectively reassure the opening or the reopening of this Bab el-Mandeb Strait. That was also the core center of gravity of the mission Aspides, which, led by the EU, just meant to reopen or at least to help the convoy open this strait facing the Houthis. So
yeah, it was with one eye towards the Houthis and also one eye towards Somali pirates at the time.
So it's a regular, conventional military operation. It has been strongly diminished the last couple of years. However, if tomorrow we have not just the Strait of Hormuz, but also Bab el-Mandeb to carry, to take control of, or to maintain open. The idea is, will the total of EU plus US navies able to face off this kind of cumulating threat?
Well, actually, there's two questions there. One, do they want to? We saw the likes of Spain this Monday, which said don't use our airspace for attacking Iran anymore. France and the UK, which are saying they're going in defensively. But as you say, they could be dragged into it, right?
Yes.
Do they want to do it? Do they want to help patrol at this point for a war they did not choose?
Probably no. But as you mentioned, they could be literally dragged in, not just because of the US or the global situation, but also because of their public opinion. Because at the end of the day, as times literally shifts towards the end of the spring and the beginning of the summer, it's also the moment where the public opinion is looking for their holidays.
It's driving season.
Yes, and probably this will also create this literally pressure on government. Let's recall one thing. It's the high price of oil that led to the yellow jacket in France, the gilet jaune. So that could be also a driver that would force literally this government to be much more forward-looking for what's happening in this region.
Borzou Dargahi, the rising price at the pump. When this all began on February the 28th, whether it was in the US or here in Europe, we thought, when the price at the pump starts to rise, then the belligerents will have second thoughts. Hasn't happened.
I think that the problem is that the U.S. government doesn't really care about public opinion. If you look at poll after poll, Americans are against the war. They don't want to be involved in this war, but you have a political elite that is completely either unable to stop this conflict or unwilling to stop this conflict or in favor of the conflict. There's a huge divergence between the political elite and the rest of the people. And as for Iran, public opinion doesn't play that much of a factor either. And to the extent that it does, it is mobilizing the people in favor of the regime. And this is an unfortunate reality that for those who are opposed to the regime, but many people in the country are kind of getting behind the regime and looking at the sacrifices that their countrymen are making. I give you one example. There was a woman that was very much involved in the protests of January against the government, and she is now volunteering for the Red Crescent Society, helping pull people out of the damaged buildings and so on. And she wrote about it on her X account, her Twitter account. So I think that there is, to the extent that public opinion matters, it's drifting more towards war rather than stopping the war.
Drifting more towards war and not so much for stopping it. Zineb Riboua, the price at the pump doesn't matter? Donald Trump got elected on the promise of lower inflation.
Yes, I think that there are a few things to take into consideration. The first one is that the United States is energy independent, which is why Trump felt much more at ease with doing this operation. The second thing is that, Trump right now is not just working on Iran. He's also working on Mexico, on Cuba, on Venezuela, on Ecuador. There are different fronts that he's looking at, and from what we can say so far is that the real question when it comes to the oil is about making sure that Iran does not sell enough oil or
but
oil
you heard.
I'm
sorry,
discount.
Zineb. You heard Guillaume Lesconjayas mention we've got driving season coming up, and then in the U.S. there's midterm elections that follow. and the U.S. is where the price at the pump has risen the most so far.
Yes, but that's what I am saying. I am saying that I think that so far, as Scott Bessent has also mentioned, they are looking at different tools and levers when it comes to relieving sanctions and so on. I think we should not dismiss that as something that they can do when things stabilize. And I think that obviously it's a big problem for the electorate, but from what I can see so far is that it is not a factor when it comes to making decisions. I think they are taking a hard stance on making sure that they complete their mission. It's really an operation with specific mission and targets. It's not a conflict and a war. I think it's very important to make sure that we have the correct framing for understanding this.
And Sophie Corbeau, do you understand the motivations more or less since 1 month on when you look again at the price at the pump in the U.S.?
I thought that because the oil price is global and therefore impacting directly the US. I mean, I would have thought that you would have, found a solution, whether that would be a ceasefire or something else a little bit earlier. But if we are moving into a scenario where effectively there is an attack on Kharg Island and there is retaliation and the price of oil is moving higher, then there will be implications for him domestically, and especially because we are moving into driving season, but even more so because we have the midterms a little bit later in the year.
All right, it was aboard. We were talking about the USS Tripoli, which is getting in position if needed for that ground invasion, if need be. It was aboard another U.S. warship that the region's fate took a turn way back in February of 1945. Then U.S. President Franklin Delano Roosevelt and Saudi King Abdulaziz Ibn Saud sealing a deal in the Red Sea aboard the USS Quincy. The deal was U.S. security guarantees for the kingdom in return for access to affordable energy supplies. When the fighting stops, Guillaume Lesconjayas, what will be left of that informal pact that was sealed all those years ago?
Well, probably a very different world in absolutely two measures. The first one is that after the discussion that took place, and especially the discussion or the words that Trump pronounced with regards to the Saudi king, this might not...
the Saudi Crown Prince.
Yes, what he said, it might be actually very offensive. It is very offensive. And might...
He said he kissed my behind.
So to say. Well, this will basically transform into, for Saudi Arabia, either get serious about its own defense, so not counting anymore on the US security guarantee, and maybe second, if what also happens, if Iran decides to step aside from the nuclear proliferation treaty, it means also that there are also other countries that might be very interested in getting into having their own nuclear umbrella. So I do not think this is very reassuring at all.
Is it the end of the U.S. security guarantees for the Arabian Peninsula?
Well, I wouldn't say the end, but Trump has literally eviscerated or strongly undermined the value of this security guarantee for sure.
Again, Borzu Dargahi, we come back to how much influence these Gulf states have with the U.S. president. We remember that trip by Mohammed bin Salman just last year to the U.S., where there was these pledges of billions in investment. Does that buy him influence?
It doesn't seem like it does. It doesn't seem like it did at all. And I don't think that the U.S. has been coordinating with the Gulf states in terms of its attacks. I don't think there is, and there's evidence of that. There was an Israeli attack on the Iranian gas fields that prompted the Iranians to hit the Qatar gas fields, and that was devastating to the LNG market worldwide. and it also angered the Qataris very much so. And it just showed the lack of coordination that, in fact, there are some actors in this conflict that are moving according to their own rhythm. And I think that definitely the security architecture of the Gulf is being transformed. I think that the UAE, for example, is going to definitely double down on its alliance with the US. Saudi Arabia, maybe less so. And as for the other GCC states, we'll see how they behave. But definitely things are going to be thrown into flux. I don't think that there is going to be regime change in Iran because it would require so much. It would require 500,000 troops to accomplish what the Israelis ultimately want and what some people in the U.S. administration ultimately want. And that would only devolve the regime into a massive insurgency that would create more trouble, actually, than now. You want to talk about 4 or 5 different militias linked to the IRGC, each assembling their own nuclear weapons. That's what we're talking about if there is the kind of unwanted Israeli fantasy of regime collapse in Iran. So I don't think that there is any decent outcome from any of this. I don't think that there's any possibility unless Trump and the Iranians and the Israelis come to their senses, listen to people like the elders or the crisis group, and have a honest diplomatic negotiation, a kind of Peace of Westphalia, if you will, where people kind of make new rules, no more attacking people's leaders, no more assassinations of scientists, no more terrorist attacks by proxies, some new rules and a new order. Unless something like that comes about, we're really headed towards a dark period.
All right, Borzou Dargai with that nod to 1648. Many thanks for joining us there from Istanbul. I want to thank Zineb Riboua in Washington and Sophie Corbeau. Guillaume Lesconjayas, thank you for being with us here in the France 24 debate.